just that little change from 1.75 to 1.78. If you bump up to one brand manufacturer's hose, it can change those total gallons per minute that you're trying to flow. So you need to identify that, and then you need to pair that with the right nozzle. Whether it's a smooth bore or a fog nozzle, you need to make sure that the target flow is that nozzle is built for that target flow. So if it's 165 or 185, you want to have that.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment on the podcast. This is a kind of a special podcast. Myself and Slauch here. We've been doing some podcasts for a while now, and today's the official day that we're going to name our podcast segment. So the name we came up with is the Apparatus Workshop. And again, just talking apparatus and trying to figure out, each department, what they're going to need, and kind of moving forward, how to spec your apparatus. And so we're kind of happy to bring that, and hopefully keep bringing out some good content. If this is the first time tuning in, definitely a couple other podcasts that we've done. Go back and check some of those podcasts out. They're on Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. You can search under podcasts. Some really good content there. But today, with the branding and everything else, we figured it would be the most fitting thing to talk about engines, and really specifically the working end, the back end of an engine. And that kind of encompasses a whole lot of things, and can kind of touch on a whole lot of other topics. And so we're looking to just dive into all of that. And this one's kind of shooting from the hip and see where we get into, because like I said, you really can't talk about one thing on an engine without talking about something else. It becomes a little bit more difficult. So I guess the first question to lead it off is, we talk about mission of the vehicle. We talk about knowing equipment, all that stuff that we've said, and, frankly, across other podcasts, that's kind of the opening salvo of anybody that's going to give advice on spec and apparatus. What do you think, besides the mission and things like that, what's the most important part of an engine company? And, I guess we talk about the back end and the working end. Kind of lay that out for us. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, man, I think the most important part when you're trying to figure out how you're going to lay that out is you have to figure out the total amount of water you're going to carry, and then the total amount of hose that you're going to carry. How many hose loads or how many hand lines, whether they're pre-connected or dead laid, are you expecting to be able to operate off that engine or make up, depending on, again, how you're doing that? And then how much supply hose, whether it's 3-inch or 4 or 5-inch, that you're going to need in order to get water to your engine. And that's going to vary based on hydrant distances, distance of driveways that are in your first due. Obviously, if you're in a city, 500 feet between hydrants, maybe we can change the diameter of the hose line we carry. If you're out in the country and you got a half a mile driveway that you got to get down, and you're probably only going to get one truck down it, then we got to think about that as well. Same thing you're thinking about. Obviously your hose loads have probably been worked on and created and modified to at this point to work through your district. But this is a good time, if they haven't been, or if you're going to change something, is to figure that out. So setbacks, things like that, just all of that. And then the big thing that's going to kind of dictate all of it is how much water are we going to carry, and how are we going to carry that water? So tank size and shape. And the only real thing that dictates tank size and shape is the length and not so much width of your fire truck, but really the length of your fire truck and how long you're going to make it work. And there's a lot of other stuff that goes into that. But really, those are the two big things: is identifying that water load, and then that hose load that we're going to carry.
Yeah, it's funny. I took a bunch of notes, and as soon as you start talking about those two topics, and honestly, we hadn't talked about this before. Right now, pretty much the same things I'm thinking of, And as you start looking at the importance of the hose line selection, you start looking at length of the hose bed, the height from the ground, and then the width of it. And now you put those three things together, and compartment size, right? How deep your compartments are going to be. It goes into the width of your hose bed. Height of the hose bed is definitely a tank size thing. And even the rear compartment, people like to store a lot of equipment back there sometimes that raise that hose bed up. Location of ladder, right? Putting it through the hose bed or through the rear there. And then really that length of the hose bed, again, goes back to water tank size, shape, and then, obviously overall length of the fire truck. I think, with the hose there, you hit the nail on the head. If you haven't looked at your hose loads in a while, that's the first place to start, I think, as far as mission and success on the fire ground. Just came back from doing training in Wisconsin for ladder truck stuff, and having a conversation about them. They have a 1988 ladder truck, so it's been a while since they spec'd a ladder truck. So we had a really great conversation. I'm glad they brought me in when they did, because just a lot of knowledge was passed along what ladder trucks look like today, and I think they're looking at their current ladder complement and they're like, yeah, that's pretty much what we're going to do now. Well, in 88, really 87 or 6, when they were speccing that fire truck, it looks completely different today. And then it's not even spec'ing the fire truck for today. It's the 20 or 30 years from now, while that fire truck might be in the fleet. And I think that hose length thing, I mean, you saw it in the last, fleet evaluation we did. And, I've seen it multiple times in fleet evaluations. And I saw it in training in Wisconsin. Go to the engine and you find almost every handline's 200 feet long, of 1.75 inches, with whatever nozzle at the end that's around the 150 or 160 GPM mark. And that's kind of the show. And so when we talk about those hose lines, dive into that deeper. What do we need to look for with those hose lines, and between length, size, everything like that? What's kind of the deal with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, two things you got in the ladder trucks there, which this is an engine company show today, but that's okay. And they're used to that. And then I guess, and it does. We're going to get into hose here a little bit, which kind of unexpected, but it kind of all goes in, because you need to make sure that you're specifying your hose beds for the type of hose that you're going to buy. So, that starts with identifying your target fire flow. NFPA minimum is 150. That's at least a target flow that I would want to target is a minimum of 150 gallons a minute. And then understanding that when you buy a hose, an 1.75 inch hose, and this shouldn't be anything new, but 1.75 inch can be anywhere from 1.75 inch all the way up to 2 inch. FDNY is running a 1.88 inch. The True ID stuff is true internal diameter hose, and that's what they're measuring is that internal diameter. And just that little change from 1.75 to 1.78, if you bump up to one brand manufacturer's hose, it can change those total gallons per minute that you're trying to flow. So you need to identify that, and then you need to pair that with the right nozzle. Whether it's a smooth bore or a fog nozzle, you need to make sure that the target flow is that nozzle is built for that target flow. So if it's 165 or 185, you want to have that. And whether it's done through a fog nozzle with a changing orifice, or a sliding orifice, or a smooth bore, or the new nozzles that are out there now that kind of give you some different patterns. It's figuring that out and getting out and designing your flow for that. And then that's going to work its way all the way back through the pumper. And again, we're moving away from the back of the fire truck a little bit, but again, the work end is still here, is that you need to make sure that you specify that your flow out of all of your discharges is your seam size discharges can be equal, so that you're not getting 100 and it's going to be coming out of a 2.5 inch discharge at first, or a 3-inch pipe, but you need to make sure that the discharges or the flows that come out of that are within 5 to 10 psi out of each one. So again, if it takes 8 bends to get to the left side of the fire truck and 12 bends to get to the right side of the rear of the fire truck with piping, then that friction loss in that is going to be different. So you need to specify that as you're building that nozzle. Hey, we have a target flow that we're trying for. we want to have a hand line pressure that if I set it at 135, that I'm going to get my target flow within my target flow, a couple PSI on either side of it out of every hand line when I set my, pump to that pressure. So again, knowing that and building that works, is key, because again, you want to be able to give not only the size hose, but really the manufacturer of the hose to your apparatus builder so that they can figure that weight into their weight calculation.
I think it's weight and size too, right? Because, we were talking about this past weekend, like anything that you can give that manufacturer that puts it on them, right? I'm putting this manufacturer hose next to this manufacturer hose. Here's my numbers. They have all the calculations to show this is how wide I need. Hey, we got a problem here. We can't fit it with this many stacks. That takes a lot of onus off you as the buyer then at that point, right?
Right. And again, when you get into that, an 1 3/4 versus a 1.88, the width of that hose folded is going to be wider, or, it's going to be different. So if you, just say, we're putting 1 3/4 hose on there and you don't tell them what, and they figure a measurement and then you go and put 1.88, or you say, oh, hey, you know what, we actually run 2-inch, that's going to be a big change. And now what you planned in your hose bed is going to change. Same thing if you're running a vinyl supply hose versus a cloth jacketed supply hose, that's going to dictate and change, the kind of your layout. So you really want to identify that early on. And again, I think it's a big deal building fire trucks is to have that target flow in mind and be able to have your pump pressures. Again, it's all about making it simplified on the fire ground. So if I can, hey, we pump every 1 3/4 hand line at 135 PSI, and it gives me between 160 and 170 PSI or GPM out of it every time, then that's what I want. It might be a little bit off from the target, but it's within, the range that we want to be in. And, so being able to identify that and give that manufacturer all that information up front is just going to make your layout of your hose bed better. And you're going to be able to go and say, hey, this is what we need to fit. And then they'll come back and say, here's where we're at. With what we can fit in there, how many stacks it's going to be, which again is going to help you. You should give them some numbers to begin with, but the number of stacks of hose is going to dictate the height of your hose bed dividers and things like that. So, it's all stuff that you want to be able to give that manufacturer.
I think that leads perfectly into, the GPM discussion too, as far as getting the proper GPM out of that, discharge, and kind of making some sort of a standard or benchmark to make sure that friction loss and stuff is going to be where it needs to be, and that you're getting the flows that you want. Again, we all have done it before, taking some sort of hose off the back, disconnecting and, putting a larger line, or, a gated Y or something else, supplying a standpipe, something like that. So we want to make sure our flows are good, even if we don't have that pre-connected line there. And along with GPM, that goes into tank size, right? And we've talked about it a bit in our other podcast, and I know me and you have had deep conversations. And every time we do a fleet evaluation, we go to spec a rig for somebody, the gallons of the tank comes up, and that target flow becomes very important, because then you start developing, numbers, and you start putting water in the time and that's really what you need to figure out. So at 150 GPM, that minimum flow, you have a 500 gallon tank, 3 minutes, 20 seconds ballpark, right? 750s, 5 minutes, 1,000, 6 minutes, 40 seconds. Then if you're bold enough, which, ill recommended on a single axle, but 1250, you're about 8 minutes and 20 seconds of time, right? So all that stuff's important, because when's the neighbor going to show up, right? Who's next coming in on that box, and when are they going to come to help you? And again, this is consistent flowing water. By the time you get on scene, to do your layout, you kind of start getting the water supply, stretch the hose line, mask up at the front door. On a 750 tank, that 5 minutes could really be 7 or 8 minutes that you need somebody to show up. And it could be your own units too, right? So I guess talk about the water tank and dive a little bit deeper into just the makeup, how it affects kind of the hose bed, and some different designs that we can have for that water tank to kind of help us out.
Yeah, and I think it's with, you can't just sit here and say, all right, we're going to design a pumper and everybody's water tank should be 750 or 500 or 1,000. It's impossible to be like that, right? I think if you were brought up on 1,000, it might be hard to drop down because you just have this thought in the back of your head that I need this. The question is always is what difference does that change in total gallons per minute really do to me? If I can't put a fire out with 750 gallons a minute, am I really going to be able to put it out with 1,000? And again, that's all questionable. If you use right hand line, maybe a 2.5 at 1,000 gallons a minute will put out, a fire that a hand line at 1,000 gallons a minute or an 1.75 line at 1,000 gallons a minute won't, because it's just not getting to the right place or it's getting eaten up with the BTUs or whatever. So it's hard to kind of differentiate that. So the important thing is to go into your pre-build process with some numbers that you're looking for. And again, when we design fire trucks, we should be designing fire trucks to be functional, but safe at the same time. If we get hurt coming off of it, then we can't affect anything on the fire ground, right? So one of the first numbers that I want to make sure that my apparatus manufacturer or designer has is the height that I want that hose bed. Ideally, we want it to be as low as possible. But again, understanding, how tanks are built, there's a couple different ways that they're built. But again, if you're going to do a low hose bed, it's going to be an L-shaped tank of some sort. It could be a square tank that's just, sitting up front, and then you have, just the frame rails that you're worried about, or whatever kind of compartment. But again, you're going to have some sort of L-shaped, hose bed at that point. So the height of the hose bed is the first thing that you want to give them. And really, you want to be somewhere between 60 and 67, 68 inches would be like the max where you would want to go. And that should be based too on the way you pack your hand lines, the height of the people in your fire department. Because that, again, if you do a flat lay and you have a whole bunch of hose, and that nozzle could be way up here to where now I have to jump up on the tailboard, which then that's another injury point, again, to think about it. I got to jump down now with hose on me. A Minuteman, it might be down a little bit more, or a modified Minuteman, it could be down more. Again, there's a multitude of ways to pack your hose. You just have to think about that and how you want to get that hose off. So you want to keep that hose bed height as low as possible. And then the other number that you want to give them is the length of the hose bed. And this is where I think a lot of people, kind of miss out. They might design a super long hose bed, which, then is going to drive the height up because the water has to go somewhere, or they might have a super short hose bed. So you have to think again about how you pack your hose. If you flat pack, neither one of those might be an issue. If it's super long or super short, it's not an issue. If it's super long, then that hose can come down, so the top of the hose is lower. If it's super short, then that hose is going to have to go up. But if I pack a Minuteman and I have to get it over my shoulder, that's where I really want to start thinking about it. And I think in that range, you're looking at that 72 to 78 inches of length of hose bed is really what I try to design my hose beds around. That 6 foot seems to be a great, center point for the Minutemans that we're used to. It's a great, point too. You might want to go a little bit shorter if you're horseshoeing it over your arms. You're going to take a couple, 100 feet or so over an arm. Maybe we want to go a little bit shorter there. But again, it kind of dictates that, that your hose bed, or the way you pack your hose and what you carry. Because again, if it's short somewhere, then your large diameter supply, your 3-inch is going to have to be shorter as well, which again is going to stack that up higher again. So those are the two numbers that I really want to start. We talk about ladder trucks. You want to start kind of designing your ladder around what you can fit in the ladder time. What ground ladders we can fit. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of that thing is ground ladders, and the whole point of this engine is the hose. So we want to make sure that we give them numbers that we want. This is where we want to fall within. Do your best to fit this in here. So those are kind of the keys. The width of the hose bed is kind of dictated by a couple things, and that's the size and depth of your compartments, and then however you decide to carry your ladders, that's going to affect it as well. The ladders are a little bit less have a little bit less of an effect on it, but they still do affect the width of your hose bed and overall the height of it
I
as
think
well.
you mentioned something there too. I want to go back to that the height of the hose bed and what we're talking about there to kind of explain that a little bit better if you're kind of not picturing it well. From the ground to the first step on a fire truck, NFPA maximum is 24 inches, right? So we need to be less than 2 feet there, right? So that's the back step, and then we're talking about to the bottom of the hose bed, right, with nothing in it. What's that bottommost measurement? And again, that's where that 68 inch max comes from. 60 ballpark number comes from, and I think that's really important. There's so many videos. We have some within our apparatus purchasing seminar and floating out there. You've probably seen on any one of the social media sites of firefighters trying to get off with hose or layout section or whatever. And falling to the ground or getting hurt or hear the horror stories or any of that stuff. And again, we're not being successful then, right? That's a dangerous situation. You got a lot of weight on, a lot of gear. So with all that in there, I think one thing we've kind of seen done, the highest hose bed, first of all, I just want to mention, was 102 inches, and that was the bottom of the hose bed, and that to me was kind of crazy, and that was on a pumper tanker. And people said, yeah, we pull hose lines off of there, and it was kind of like looking at it like, well, that's, to me, that was just far fetched, right? But you don't know, you don't know, and B, I mean, you have to deal with what you have to deal with, right? And that, they might not have been involved in speccing that fire truck, but what they did say was, well, we have low cross lays, and that's kind of where our tack lines are, so it's okay. What would you say to that? I mean, we see cross lays or speed lays or bumper lines on like the rescue engine style vehicle to kind of cheat their attack lines in a lower spot, but keep their hose beds high. What would you kind of say to that? I guess what's your thoughts on that kind of maneuver?
I would say that again, the L-shaped hose tank and low hose beds is relatively new, right? I mean, other than if you were in New York City or a larger city, the rural fire department probably didn't start transitioning to an L-shaped hose bed until after 2010 at some point. So we're only 14 or 15 years into this lower hose bed that we're dealing with. So again, when you were doing pumper tankers, a 3,000 gallon pumper tanker, eight or probably the last time you bought a fire truck, that high hose bed was normal. I think that the hose bed height is one of those things that needs to translate around the engine. A lot of times you see people with high cross lays. Again, that if you have to jump up on something to get your line off the engine, it is just asking. It's an issue that is asking to call. It's asking to hurt yourself essentially, right? At some point, somebody's knee is going to give out, or something's going to go wrong coming off of that. So again, we want to work to design everything as low as possible. Front jump lines or the speed lays or whatever on the front bumper, that's all personal preference on how you want to set your engines up. I don't have much background with the speed lays or whatever on the front bumper, but with the front jump lines, we have plenty of it. Whether you like them or not, it's an option. It's a way to look at doing things. It does get things down low, but again, everything that we do here has some sort of effect on something else of the fire truck. If I'm going to put any type of line on my front bumper that's going to be effective to fight fire, you're probably looking at a 19-inch bumper. So if you have areas, where your angles of approaches are issues, that's something that you have to think about. If I'm going to add 19 inches to the front of my fire truck, that could affect me being able to get in somewhere. If I want to bring my cross lays lower, there are multiple, you can do multiple different heights of cross lays based on the manufacturer. But again, that's going to cut into your availability of your pump panel. If you cut into it too much and you need all these different dischargers, or you want, that could extend from what could be the smallest size pump panel to having to extend now the length of your fire truck out. And it's the same thing on the back. Is the higher or lower we go, it's going to dictate different things, right? Obviously, we go higher, it's going to dictate the height. We go lower. At some point, we can only go so low. I mean, the frame rails are essentially what the tank sits on. So at some point, you can only go so low. And if you're going to have If you're going to bring your discharges to the end of the fire truck, there's going to have to be sleeves for the piping. Depending on where you put your ladders, that's going to affect that too. And then same thing, an intake or a rear compartment of some sort, is going to affect, something's going to be affected there based on the changes that we make. But ideally, I want my hose bed height to be even, at least for the cross lays and the rear hose bed around the truck if possible. But also understanding that I might have to raise one up if I want to keep with small pump panel. I might not be able to drop my cross lays down, as low as I would like. I might have to have them go up a little bit higher. And again, it's all kind of give and take on that, based on what you want that fire engine to do.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, again, I think we go back to drivability and weight. Conversations we've had about about every other rig ever, and you're kind of touching on that drivability thing, and I think weight's another one. We start talking about tank size, and where the water is going to be located at. Low hose bed, 1,000-gallon engine. There's that give and take, and I think the take from is you're going to get some weight pretty high up there, and to me, always working off a 5 or 750 tank, I can see a lot of these municipalities or more rural areas as they start getting built up, they still keep with that 1,000-gallon tank because, well, that's like you said, that's what we always had and that's what we're comfortable with. It seems like the more experience you have, the more you're able to kind of move away from those larger tank sizes a bit because you've worked in that area a bit. And again, we talk about tank size with time again. At 750, at 150, you have 5 minutes to be able to find some sort of a water supply, right? So as some people look at it as a training or driver issue. That's a pretty decent amount of time to find that water supply. So again, that's something else we can engineer into a fire truck and look for, right? Where are my intakes? Where are they going to go? Front, side, rear, right? And so I think there's a larger conversation there. We talk about water and tank size and stuff like that. But I think weight is a big one. Where that location of weight is, and again, who's going to drive this fire truck? We talked about it in ladder trucks a whole bunch, but even in engines, it's the same way. There has to be some sort of a training wheel fire truck. If you don't have EMS or ambulances, you go from a Toyota Corolla to the just gigantic pumper tanker tandem axle, thousands of gallons of water. That's a very difficult transition. So I think having that, short wheelbase, short length, low weight and drivable fire truck is pretty important.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about a short wheelbase, short length, but again, everything that we do. So if we go and say, hey, we want 1,000-gallon, pumper, we can get the hose bed height and the length that we really want, but that's going to come at a cost, right? Where now instead of being in a short body, we're going to have to extend the body, probably extend the wheelbase, most likely. And then even then, with 1,000 gallons, you're probably going to raise the body of the truck above the cab. So, again, it's just understanding that there are ways to get what you want, but it also is going to affect things like overall height. So, there's a lot of constraints that could be put on you designing this fire truck. If you need to be below, 10 foot, you might not be able to go with a low hose bed, 1,000, and you need 1,000 gallons. Your hose bed might be higher than you want because you have to bring the back of the body down a little bit. So again, things are possible. But that's where you want to start thinking, all right, do I really still need 1,000 gallons? Were hydrants put in? Was another fire company, put in place before, since I built this last fire truck, things like that, all kinds of things that, but again, it gets to the moral of this, or the big part of the takeaway is that everything you do to that hose bed or that tank, really, the tank has some sort of other effect on that fire truck.
I want to dive in to this. You brought it up and kind of touched upon it quickly, but that compartment depth, between compartment depth and ladder location, we talked about this in the 2-part rescue engine conversation when Alex was on with us, and I think it's almost like I'm seeing it more since the conversation than I did before, which was still a lot then. And you see a really, really old fire truck. It wasn't a thing. Then all of a sudden you see this like, middle generation of fire trucks, and it was just a huge thing. And now it's kind of, 60/40, still having these full depth compartments on both sides in some instances with just a regular engine company. It kind of hurts my soul a little bit, because what I see when I see that is not necessarily an engine rescue or rescue engine, but an engine trying to be a ladder truck and carry ventilation equipment, saws, fans, hazmat equipment. It's the one size fits all. We don't have enough staffing. We're going to get one rig out, and that's going to carry everything. And it kind of hurts my soul. I just again, that 1988 ladder truck was third out on a reported structure fire. 2 engines went first. And you start opening. I didn't even have to look, but I did out of curiosity anyway. You open up the compartments, fans, saws, more than even what was on the ladder truck. We've seen that, in Indiana. We've seen that in Michigan. I mean, it's not, New York. We've seen it. It doesn't matter the state or location in the country. That's kind of a common thing. And so I guess, touch on that about all this need or want, I guess would be a better word, to carry equipment, and kind of how all that can work in, and what's more important, right? One thing or the other, and how do we kind of make that work?
Right. Well, I think that at some point here in the fire service in the early 2000s, late 90s, the fire department went through this all hazards kind of effect where we had to be able to do everything. And I think people at that point too tried to solve staffing issues with fire trucks, and like you said, let's build this fire truck to do everything. And it comes back to what we say in every, I guess it should kind of be our catchphrase, is you got to figure out what the mission of the fire truck is, and build it for that. Because what's happening, the reason people don't want to drive that ladder truck is it's too big. So you're going to eventually build an engine company at some point that's just too big, and people don't want to drive it. So determine the mission of the fire company or the fire apparatus that you're trying to build, and then go from there. If you the standard lower width or depth of a compartment on a majority of the fire truck manufacturers is somewhere between 24 and 28 inches. It kind of depends on the width of the apparatus. And then the upper portion is somewhere between 12 and 18 inches based on the tanks. Now, we could go full depth on the upper portions, which would give us, equal depth top and bottom. And that's what you see on rescue pumpers. You can do that on one side of the body versus the other side. You could keep the other side traditional with the ladders on the side. What we've seen then is that a company will go, with compartments, maybe not full depth on the upper part, but a 12-inch depth compartment on the upper side, and then bring the ladders and slide them through the tunnel. That's going to affect your hose loads at that point, right? Some part of that hose load is going to have to come up and go over. And even potentially a tank manufacturer or an engine, an engineer in the building the apparatus could, and we've seen this design where the water tank comes up and goes over and then offloads that engine improperly. So, again, everything we do has some sort of negative, other side to it. So, again, it's kind of defining that mission. Do I need to carry all this stuff? Is that 12 inches of compartment space on the right side where the ladders would normally go really going to be effective? Is it going to carry any tools that are really worth me losing, my traditional ground ladder home and sliding it into through the hose bed or under the hose bed? Again, I don't know. You need to kind of, again, what do we need this thing to do? What do we expect it to carry? And if we expect it to be able to do everything on the fire ground, it's just not going to do that. And that's where we really have to, call your neighbors for help. Put an engine from one company and a ladder from another company on the assignment. This is what I expect you to bring. It gets there. Everything can get done at once. Maybe you have to wait another 5 minutes to ventilate the building, but on food on a stove or something like that. But set your engine company up to be an engine company, and set your ladder company up to do this. But again, it's a little bit more important than that. Is making sure that you can do what your department needs to do, and then designing around it. Does that kind of jumps around a little bit there?
No, right. I think it's all kind of important, and I think even the length of ground ladder kind of matters. There's a lot of engines, and again, where I was in Wisconsin, work we did recently in New York, carrying 28, 30, 35-foot ladders on an engine company because that's the need of the area, which obviously warms my soul, thinking that people are not only looking at their ladder trucks and looking at looking at what they need for ladder complement, but they're also looking at the engines, right? They're not just signing on the dotted line saying 24 and 14 is exactly what I need. But again, there's drawbacks for that too. They had to move it to a ladder rack, and so now it's sitting on the top of the engine, which is fine, gets it kind of out of the way. But then it's kind of a drawback now when their area starts getting built out. It becomes maybe a little bit harder with parked cars and stuff. The tight roads they're putting in, the complexes they're putting in now, access to those ladders is maybe a little bit more difficult. So what was that taller, more reachable ladder is now becoming more of a pain to get out, and putting on the side of the engine now, you're probably going to have to shorten it back up to maybe that 24 or something like that. I mean, it's just not quite as much room that there is on the top.
Yeah, and I'm not a fan of ladder racks, but again, you might get to the point where you defining the mission of the vehicle says, hey, listen, I need this extra compartment space. I don't want to lose the tank size, so the ladder rack becomes the best option. And I think then, in that case, if you are getting into that built-up environment, it's just understanding what my options are to get that thing down. If I can't get it down, if I can only get it partially down, do I need to climb up on top of the car, to pull that thing off? At this point, if we're into that case, it really doesn't matter if you dent somebody else's car up, right? How do I, maybe that's a training, like, how do I get this thing down through the hose bed, things like that. But again, it comes back to defining the mission of the vehicle and making sure that vehicle, and we talk about safety, none of that stuff is probably really safe. But again, it's definitely not safe if you never practice it. But in defining the mission of that vehicle, having those options available becomes, key. And again, back to the back of the fire truck is, this thing is designed, and we're talking about engine companies, is designed to put fires in. So the ladders can, in some cases, be a secondary thought, but they still need to be thought about. In the case like you're talking about is, hey, I need a 35 because we have, huge, drop-offs in the back of a house. I need to make sure that we can cover everything because I don't know where my ladder truck might be 15, 20 minutes out. So I need a 35 to ensure that I have at least some protection here. But I don't want to lose my hose bed because I have long driveways, long setbacks, whatever, and I want to maintain my tank size. So again, it's going back to defining the mission. It's an engine company. It's designed to put out fires. So let's set it up for that, and we'll make it safe for the stuff that we're going to do every day, and we'll have a plan for when that other stuff doesn't really work out the way we want it.
I think that's huge too. I mean, there's that hierarchy, right? We go down the mission, and I can have missions, right? But you can't have linear missions, right? It has to be in that list. And I look at ventilation, right? Like that to me is now a non-emergency service call to an extent, right? So if smoke in the house or a fire alarm or something like that, and we have to call, a truck for ventilation. I mean, in Arlington we do it, in College Park did it. Right, we own a ladder truck and it sits in the firehouse. If you go out for a fire alarm with the engine, we got to call for a ladder truck for ventilation. And guess what? That's okay. You know what that does? Gives somebody else a call stat, and it kind of legitimizes that big, upwards of $2 million vehicle now, and it's doing the stuff, right? And then it forces your neighbors to carry the stuff they're probably supposed to be carrying on the ladder truck and not the engine anyway, right? Kind of brings everything.
And again, yeah, and again, it's understanding, kind of what that's meant to do. If you are on a food on a stove call without a fan to ventilate, then it's not like you can't ventilate. You just have to use other options. Can we turn the vent fan in the bathroom on? Can we turn the vent fan, on the stove on? Open windows. Do they have fans? What can we do to start moving air until we get something there? Same thing, if we stretch a line in and we put a room and contents fire out, can we hydraulically ventilate that building? That's something you hardly ever see anymore. If we understand flow paths, we can start to do that and accomplish a lot without anything else, just with what we designed on the engine company. And again, it goes back to that thinking outside the box and understanding all of those little other tiny tasks, and having a plan to move on with what you're working with. But you designed your engine company to do what it was meant to do. and you set your hose bed up to function for you and your department safely. And that's, again, that's key. Function and safety is what we're trying to build these things for.
Right. You hinted on like the no, this maneuver might not be safe, and to me, I agree with that. And some will say this job's inherently unsafe, which is very true. But that first mission of the vehicle being an engine and stretching hose lines, that's not what necessarily should be sacrificed, right? If we're sacrificing anything, the one time in a career where you're going to be throwing the 35-foot 3 section, or 28 or 30-foot ladder on the ladder rack that didn't come down or is in the way of a car, and you're kind of climbing on a car or something, I might be okay with that, right? I think that's more of a calculated risk, more so than bringing that hose bed up. And I think if anybody takes anything away from this, it's safety is absolutely paramount. But again, just like the missions of the vehicle, some things that we have to go to at points are going to be unsafe. And
Yeah.
and we just got to limit that, right? We don't want it the everyday action of, let's say, the EMS equipment. We battled this in Arlington a little bit, right? Kind of getting off topic, but staying on topic. If we're pulling off EMS equipment 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times a day, that needs to be somewhere accessible, right? We can't bury that in the cab in a high side compartment where you're pulling it out, dragging it on the ground, trying to get out of the fire truck with it. That to me is right unsafe. That's not, you're asking for not necessarily somebody to get killed, but somebody to get hurt, right? There's going to be some sort of injury in that when you expose them to that. So let's put it somewhere where it's more accessible, because that's, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever way you look at it, that's the mission of that vehicle. That is what that vehicle runs a good amount of. So let's build it for that, right? Let's make sure it's good.
It's the same thing with the high-rise racks too. We keep ours on our side because they come off 5, 6 times a day, depending on what house you're assigned to. And high-rise racks aren't just high-rise racks; they're extension packs, really. I mean, that's again, that's really what they should be designed for in a rural setting. You still want them, and you want them to be functional and reachable. If you got them buried behind 5 things, when you have to run a 500-foot hand line, because that's again the most reasonable thing to do with that, and quick thing to do. Can you get to them to do that, or are you stuck setting up some sort of leader line, to go put what is essentially a room and contents fire out that now is going to turn into something bigger because it takes you, a whole lot longer to set up. So again, it's making sure that stuff is the stuff that you need is easily accessible, and that again, that's height of the hose bed. One of the other things on the back that we kind of safety and function wise is the length of that tailboard. I think that's something a lot of people, hey, we're going to make a short fire truck, so I'm going to do a 10-inch tailboard. Well, 10 inches, your feet are not standing on 10 inches. So when you go to pack, when you get to the upper parts of that hose bed to pack, now you're going to be falling off of it. I strive for 16-inch hose or a 16-inch tailboard. That's where I want to be. That's safe. It's easy to work on. If you have accessory steps or a midpoint step halfway up that helps you get in the hose bed, it's going to be at least 8 inches. So that 16 gives you the ability to work. 14 is the lowest I would really want to go, but every couple inches you start knocking off of that, you're going to start to feel that as you're trying to get up there. If you do have to get up, especially the higher we have to go, it's really going to be an issue. And that tailboard length is normally measured from the back of the fire truck, not the tailboard itself. So you always have some sort of gap between the tailboard and the cab or the body of the truck. So you're already losing what you're considering a 16-inch hose bed to some extent. I think that's something a lot of people don't look at, and then they get there and they're trying to pack a hose, and they got to figure out how to hold themselves up there while they're trying to make folds and make it look at least decent so it comes off nice. So again, something else that they forget to. And the same thing talking about the steps. Steps up into the apparatus or the hose bed to pack the hose are a big thing. Everybody, likes to put the flip down steps on there, but we've all tried to come back off a fire truck where you're down and you're trying to kick your foot around trying to find a step so you can flip it down and not fall. Whereas if you go with a wedge step or, some sort of a cast step that is, 8 inches by 5 or 6 inches, wide off the back of the truck. It's a true step that you can safely step on. And again, that's key. So same thing. We've done a couple things in Arlington that with the back of our hose beds to try to help us, whether it's gain access to the hose bed by moving the bar back, 12 to 16 inches, the top bar that holds the two sides together. We slide that back sometimes. That gives us the ability to stand on either the front of the hose bed and crawl under it or go over it, depending on the height of the hose, instead of that bar being right at the edge of the hose bed where you kind of fight it the whole time. And then one of the other things, again, is to think about how you pack that hand line. Are the baffles of the hand line or the baffles of the hose bed divider going to affect your nozzle position? We've pulled ours back 6 inches. So you can pack the hose past it if you want, but it gives you room to have that nozzle sit there, not hanging off the back of the engine, things like that. So again, there's lots of things that you can do to make the back of that fire truck functional and safe at the same time.
I think one thing we haven't really talked about much when we talked about flows and size, I think we need to talk a little bit more about length and number of hose lines. And really where that comes into is we talked about those, deeper compartments and how it kind of eats into the tank a little bit, but the width of the hose bed in the back and how you really lose a lot there. And, so I guess the first question is, ideal number of hose lines off an engine and like what that would look like, right? Not just saying, I want 7 hand lines, but what's the supply? What's your lengths of lines? Like what's your kind of ideal there? And then building off of that, if I did do those double deep compartments, where do those hose lines go, right? Because they're not off the back of the engine anymore. So how there's different lengths and stuff. How can I make that work on a fire truck? And I think obviously, leading into this, it's going to be a little bit difficult, but let's kind of work through that to kind of talk that kind of evolution out.
Sure. And, again, the way you do things in your territory are going to dictate, that pretty drastically. And again, the mission of your fire truck. In the Northern Virginia, really more than the Southern Maryland region, the front jump line is really, a big go-to hand line with, small 1.5 story bungalows, single family dwellings that were built here in the 50s and 60s. Being able to nose in and run a 150-foot bumper line, into a small house was ideal. Companies found that was the best way to do things. So in this region, that's the front jump line is a pretty normal hand line. But again, that's based on the type of or the building stock that you have and how you normally attack fires. If you go up and not just, you look at Harrisburg and the squads that they kind of have, they have 4 or 5 crosslays that come off of their, different 1 3/4, 2.5, but they're, 3 or 4 1 3/4 crosslays and a 2.5. So again, that is going to extend your pump panel, but it's going to, it allows you to get the hand lines that you need based on your first due. And same thing there, row homes, things like that. They've figured that type of hose pack works well for them. Maybe the ladder and the engine might be coming in from different directions all the time. So if they can pull up and, come straight off into the house versus having to come around the back of the engine, it's better for them that way. And then again, if you feel the need or your district dictates that you need some sort of rescue engine where you're going to shrink the size up, then those hand lines obviously have to go somewhere else. So, there's all those options. Hand lines that you see, I think a lot of people put in, they overestimate the amount of hand lines that you can do. And really what it comes down to is your water supply. Your pumper definitely is not going to, supply all those hand lines. 500 gallons would be the minimum that your tank to pump would be able to supply on a standard engine. But, so your intakes are going to kind of dictate that. And, I think that you want to keep 4 hand lines per intake would be like kind of where you want. You kind of build from there, but if we get more than 4 hand lines per intake that we have coming in, we're at some point going to not be able to get the water in that we really want to. and Dennis Laguerre, if you go back and you listen to one of his podcasts, it wasn't a podcast. I think it was more of a class that he did on fire apparatus, I believe, right before FDIC. He kind of talks to that and gets into it a whole lot more. He's a lot smarter on water supply than I am. So if you really want to, kind of learn that portion of it, that's a great place to go and kind of get that. But I think, 4 hand lines per intake. So if you're not putting a rear or a front intake on it, at the end of the day, you really only have one intake. And that's the stuff coming in from the side. So if you're going to go and put 7 hand lines on it, you're not going to be able to get enough water in to supply all those hand lines. If you add the second one in the rear or the front, then maybe we can talk, think about bumping this up a little bit more. But, you do have to think about that water supply coming in to get water out. So,
I think the big thing we talked about crosslays and the bumper is, the bumper line, I think 150, 50, 100, 150, 200. I think past 200, you're kind of not really able to fit anything anymore. So I think that's kind of our limit there. Crosslay, I think, 250, maybe 300. Again, depending on height, stuff like that, feet in length, that's probably where you're limited there. Speed lay, probably 2, 3 is probably pushing on some of the speed lays. So 2 or 250. So I think with the rear hose bed, I think what I was, kind of getting at with that question, that's where your longer line is going to be, right? Your leader line, your 400, your 450, 350, whatever, your longer line you want it to be. And I think once we start shrinking down with that rescue style body, if you will, you start kind of losing those longer lines. And I think people underestimate how useful that really is. And I said it in the ladder class. I'm going to say it today because we haven't talked about ladder trucks enough. If you don't have longer hand lines on your engine, you're not leaving room for a ladder truck, right? Because you're forcing yourself to get nervous. And when I was a brand new officer riding the seat of the engine, I know you probably experienced it too. And if someone says they didn't, they're probably lying to you. The first decision you have to make getting off the fire truck is what line to pull, right? Make that call as the officer or even the lineman, right? Depending on your jurisdiction and how it works. I always stretched long in the beginning, right? Or big and long, right? College Park, our 400-foot line was 2-inch, and so was our 250-footer. Well, we had a 200-foot 1.75-inch, and that, if you had a newer officer, you could tell that line almost never got pulled because 250 feet's longer than 200, and 2 inches bigger than 1.75-inch. So if I pull my 250, I'm pretty well good, right? Like I'm going to make it, and I'm going to have the flow to put the fire out. It was really the experienced officers that called for the 200 3/4. And so I think, when you get into a cycle of just having 200-foot lines, the same flow, you kind of get stuck in that cycle a little bit. And I think there's really a need to step out of that and say, all right, what do we actually need here? And it might, like you said, it might not be 14 hand lines. It might be, the 8 or 7 or 6. And maybe we have 2 or 3 hand lines more than we're able to pump, but we're doing it for a reason because we need the 400-foot line. And if we're pulling that, we're probably not pulling the bumper line too, right? Like, so that we can maybe have that separation, but all of those things I think need to come in play. So, as we kind of wrap up here, ideal engine with layout of hose, the entirety of like what, like in Arlington, let's say we'll walk through that or Oxford, what's your ideal engine layout? If you were to drive any engine in the US, what's your hose kind of layout that you'd look for? And kind of just run through quick why each one of those selections and their purpose on the fire truck, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, that's really difficult, based on where you are. Right. So I think ideally you want 2 of, and it could be 150 or 200 foot, but I think you want 2 of your everyday hand lines. Look, your bread and butter. This is what we do every day. I think you want 2 of them. You want your first line and your backup line. And then we can go from there, and we can build out, or we can plan for that extended line, whether it's a 300, which is what we used to have in Arlington when I started. We were running 300s. When we switched them to the 400, because we just realized that in the garden apartments that we had, that eventually it wasn't enough. And as the garden apartments went from the 2-story, typical brick garden apartment to the 4, 5, 6 story, open stairwell wood frame garden apartments, we started to see the need for that change. So, again, I think that you want to have those longer hand lines, whether it's 250, 300, 350, but longer, or 400, but longer than your everyday bread and butter. And then you definitely need a 2.5, and 2.5 length can vary. Do you want to do a 200 pre-connect, or are you going to dead lay your 2.5? But you definitely want to have that large. Let's hit it fast and hard and knock this thing back. Line, and again, that offset and what you're trying to protect can kind of dictate what that length is, and if it has to be a dead load or a pre-connect, you can set that up. But again, you get one of those wood frame garden apartments with the open stairwell off, you may be able to make a big effect with that 2.5 more so than an 1 3/4 right off the bat, depending on what's on, and provide a larger difference on the fire ground. And then you need some sort of, I think, 3-inch line, not a hand line per se, but a line for your portable deck gun, portable mini deck gun, I guess would be the better, or master stream monitor to put out, and then your 4-inch or your 5-inch or whatever you're running for your supply line. But I think it gets into that where if you're going to run everything off the back, you're going to get 2 small hand lines or lower length 200 foot inches or 150 foot 200 foot off the rear, and then your long line and a 2.5 off the rear, along with your 2 different size supply lines. I think that's doable, provided you stayed with a standard engine. If you're going to bring one of the sides in, then we're going to have to go back and look at, hey, do we need to add cross lays, or do we want front bumper lines? Again, it kind of, but I think that's kind of where I would want to be, is with at least two of my, bread and butter fire lines, a long line of, a 2.5. And then, if I wanted to throw an extra line on there just for some, car fires, or, those one-off smaller house fires, then maybe I put one on the front bumper. Maybe you put 2 on the front bumper. But again, every one of those things that we do has some other effect on that fire engine. What's your thought? I mean, where are you at with your hand line?
I'm not. I don't really want to talk about it much. I think we've talked about engines way too long. But I will, I guess, in the spirit of the podcast. I think the same thing. I think you hit the nail on the head with the 2 bread and butter. Ideally for me, that the 200 foot, 300 foot, 400 foot off the back. We talked about in Arlington a little bit for a hot second. Really is appealing to me because, we talk about the backup line needing to be, longer or greater or bigger in some aspects. And I think that 2, 3, 4 really kind of starts setting the stage there. If you pull the 300, the 400 is a good backup, right? If you pull the 200, 300 is a great backup. And, that front bumper line for that kind of auxiliary or, trash line, or that really tight area, 2.5, 2-inch, some sort of bigger line. Again, staffing can dictate that. You could still get a pretty decent amount of water out of that 2-inch. I really don't love the leader lines as much. I mean, I'm thinking, we talk in the fire service about, fast water and how quickly fires spread. And then we take this operation for the first and second hand line. You're taking the time out of the first new engine to get their first line in service. So I'm not a huge fan of that. So, again, those standpipe racks to help kind of extend the lines you have on the engine. If you have a 400 with 200 foot standpipe racks, I mean, if you're farther than 600 feet, wasn't meant to be, and it's going to take a while anyway, right? For the first line to get in service. So I think, you have a lot of flexibility there to get yourself 600 feet in the initial tack line. That's, you're in a pretty good spot as the first new engine. If you're not that close, then, I mean, honestly, it's just not going to happen, right? You can't really prepare for every single thing, and 600 feet is a pretty good distance.
Right, and I think too that just goes back to saying, hey, make sure your standpipe racks or your leader line or your extended racks are in a position that you can get to them. Understand how you can break a 2.5 down, a 3-inch down, however, you might have to build a line to get to what you need. I still do actually. I carry a 2.5 to 1.5 inch reducer in my pocket, so I can break down, anything I want and really continue to add on if necessary. But, again, it's just understanding, all that when you're designing that engine out. Hey, we are at some point. We're going to design this thing to do what we do every day. It's going to give us options, but we also have to be able to work around the problems that are going to arise on this fire ground. And, again, that even the engine should be designed around that, making sure that the stuff is where you need it and you can get to it quickly without taking a whole bunch of stuff out, becomes key. But, and I think, we're at this an hour now. I think it's time to wrap it up. But, I think that when you sit down and you say, I'm going to build a new pumper, it's don't look at what you've done for the last whatever. Look at what needs to change and what you need to do for the next 20 years. Make those changes, identify, again, the mission of what we want this thing to do. And like you said earlier, it can do more than one thing, but it's step by step. It's not, I guess linear, like you said, right? We're going to do this really, really well, and then the rest of it's going to come down. And we got into that with the rescue engine conversation, right? Is it a rescue engine or is it engine rescue, right? We're going to ask it to do two things. It's not going to do either one of them really well, but we're going to make it do one of them the best that it can. And that's the same thing here, right? We're going to make this engine company, we're going to set it up to do the best we can. And we're going to give numbers to the apparatus designer and say, this is where we want you to fall. Help us out with it, right? This is the height of the hose bed. We want to be between 60 and 68 inches high. And we want to be between, 72 and 78 inches in length. And we want to have somewhere between 750 and 1,000 gallons of water on it. What can you do for us? The same way, hey, we're building a ladder truck and I need to carry 235s, 228s, and 316s in a ladder tunnel. What can you do for me? That's, kind of build your engine around the main function of it. So hose lines in this case is what we want to do. And we want to have a nice, aggressive, functional, and safe fire truck at the same time.
Yeah, which is definitely obtainable. I think for me, my parting words, just, drive your air. It's almost the same thing I said for the ladder trucks, because I think it's just as applicable. Drive your territory and get out and start just measuring those distances, right? Like you'll be really surprised. Like, all right, where's the engine going to park to allow access for the truck? Okay, this is where we're going to park on this type of structure. All right, let's go to the farthest spot in this building that we're going to kind of need to go. And this is perfect world. And you're going to see that 200-foot line, I think, come up short more than you think. And again, if you don't, great, you're in a phenomenal area. And if it's, only a couple of times and you have your standpipe racks in a great spot, that you can extend your line out, then, more power to you. That's phenomenal. Then good for you. And kind of keep sailing on. But I think, the majority of what we're seeing now is just a lot of things are changing and ladder complements and hose loads aren't. So please go out, evaluate, get out to Side Charlie, get out, walk. Don't just drive by. Look how deep the buildings are, how big the houses are, and kind of start really estimating those stretches. And again, prepare for that engine coming in. At the end of the day, even if you sign contract already and you're in that 2 to 3 to 4 year wait period, the work's not done. There's still changes that can be made. So definitely still go out and kind of investigate that stuff.
Right. And make your changes early.
Yeah.
Don't wait. If you notice something needs to be changed, tell your manufacturer you need to open this thing back up and make the change. Why it only costs you, $50,000 versus $100,000.
Right.
And the other thing, talking about estimating the hose stretch is, remember, you need to have at least 50 feet when you get to that door.
Yeah.
You don't want to stretch and, oh, yeah, we made it, and just have the nozzle touching, the door. You need to have 50 feet to make it through that apartment. And then, again, understand we have numerous apartments in Arlington that are 2 stories. You go in on one floor and you go up or you go down. So make sure that you have at least 50 foot and that you're planning on that as you're doing it. Don't just stretch and say, oh, we're good to go. If you don't have hose left on your shoulder at the door, you're not good to go. You need to, go back to the drawing board and figure out how we're going to fix it. So
your first U truck thanks you if you if you actually have the right amount of hose. Too many times I've looked back and they're like, yeah, we're good. We're charging line now. I'm like, you in what line? You're about out the door
Right.
and you got about 4 feet to go. Like,
Right.
where are you planning to go when you go inside? Just right in the front door? Because we got a whole lot of work to do in this thing, and you ain't gonna go anywhere in there.
Right.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I think that we covered a lot of information. So if you guys listening, appreciate you bearing with us through this. Thanks for listening to the inaugural named podcast, the Apparatus Workshop. If you have any questions about any of the information we went over, have any topics that you want us to cover in the future, or something you want to hear us talk about, or just a question you want an answer to because you got a question spurred along, reach out. My email is Nick Nick Wilbur Wilbur at evr.solutions, and we'd be happy to answer your question, or obviously do a podcast on a topic if you have it. Throw anything our way and we'll be glad to do it. Appreciate you guys coming out, and be safe out there.
Good. Thank you all.